All right, this next case study is another one of my favorites, San Diego burrito ratings. So the data set that we've got here includes burrito ratings and Yelp reviews from 65 different San Diego restaurants in 2016. So 237 observations. It's a relatively small sample, but some really interesting, kind of unusual dimensions and measures that we have to work with in this case. Dimensions include location, the burrito name, the date, the recommendation, who the reviewer was, and any additional notes. And then for measures, we've got the Yelp rating, the cost of the burrito, and then a whole bunch of 0 to 5 ratings along different elements of the burrito itself. So the tortilla, the temperature, the fillings, the meat volume, uniformity, salsa, synergy, whatever that means, and wrap quality. So we're going to cover a few different concepts here. One of the most important ones is calculating using count columns. One of the trickier concepts that's really important to keep practicing. We'll practice summarize values by, show values as a rank, and then do some really nice conditional formatting tricks to really bring this data to life. So let's go ahead to Excel and jump right in. All right, so if you've got your pivot table case study workbook open, we're going to be working with the San Diego burrito ratings tab. And let's just Control A to grab everything, insert a new pivot table. We're going to drop it into a new worksheet that we can name burrito pivot. And we'll right click, change the tab color to a light green, and we're good to go. So looking through the fields in the data set that we have to work with here, like we talked about, you might notice it's a little bit different than some of the other data sets that we've worked with up to this point. In this case, all of our measures, with the exception of cost, are ratings on a 0 to 5 scale. So this will give us a really good chance to practice some techniques like weighted averages and using count columns in our calculated fields. So let's kick off this case study with an analysis of scores by burrito. So I can take burrito, drag it right here into my row labels, and then any scores that we care about, we can pull into values. So maybe we don't need all 8. Maybe we only care about a few of these, like tortilla, temperature is important. Of course, you need good fillings. And then let's go with synergy. Sounds like a good rating. So we've got 4 different ratings: tortilla, temp, fillings, and synergy. But now you can see they're evaluating as sums, which doesn't really make a lot of sense here. You know, if we had 2 ratings for a given burrito for one field like tortilla, and one rating was a 4, one was a 5, we'd want to evaluate that as a 4.5 average, not the sum of 4 and 5, which would be a 9 in this case. So let's change the summarize values options from sum to average for each of these. Summarize values by average. And then what we'll also do is change the number format to make it a little bit more readable here. So I'm just going to do a number with 2 decimal points instead of the general format. So there we go. Now we've got our 4 average scores across these 4 individual elements or components of the burrito. And now I want to create some sort of a single aggregated average score based on these 4 component ratings. So why don't we play with this a little bit and go into our calculated fields and call it average total score. Now what you think might make sense here in terms of the formula could be to open up a parenthesis and say, all right, our average total score should be our tortilla score plus our temp score plus our fillings score, and finally our synergy score. Close the parenthesis, divide by 4 to take the average, and press OK. Now, when you do this and it drops in this average total score, you'll see some make sense, like for 619 Burrito Original. If I just select the 4 component scores, down here I can see the average is 375, which is correct here in column F. For addiction, the average is 3, which is correct. But then I have ones like 2 and 1, where the average should be 363, and I'm getting 10.88. And Abu Dhabi, which should be 355, I'm getting 24.88. Now, I want you to take a minute and pause this video and just think through exactly why this is taking place. So why am I getting scores that are greater than 5 when really they should all average out the average of these 4 fields? So take a minute, think about it, and then press play when you think you have an answer. All right, so were you able to figure it out? This gets back to the calculated field concept, where any measures or metrics included in a calculated column have to be evaluated as a sum. So right now, because our calculated field is taking these 4 scores, tortilla, temp, fillings, and synergy, it's taking the sum of those 4 scores and then dividing by 4. So in cases where there's only one rating for a given burrito, the sum will be the same as the average, so our calculated field will give us exactly what we need. The problem lies in burritos that have more than one review, and we can actually see what's going on there by pulling in another instance of burrito, which is a dimension, and evaluating it as a count in our values field. And now, since that's counting the number of times this burrito showed up in the data set, and because our data set is at the review level, we know that this indicates the number of reviews for each particular row label. So the cases that did evaluate correctly are all cases where there's only one review. In other words, there's no difference between evaluating a sum versus an average. Where we do see the incorrect average total scores are for any burrito that has more than one review, like 2-in-1, Abodaba, El Pastor, California, and so on and so forth. And one thing that's kind of interesting to note here is that if we take, I'm just going to clear a pivot table field list for a second to get some more room. If we take the average total score from our calculated field and divide it by this count column, the number of reviews, then all of a sudden we're getting the correct numbers. So 2-in-1, for instance, the average should be 363, 363. For California, the average should be 365, 365. So by dividing the calculated field that we had created, which is built on sums, and dividing that average total score by the count of reviews, we end up with the correct number that we're looking for. So if you recall, we can't add an operator called count of burrito into our calculated field because, again, we need sums. We can't use counts. So as a workaround, what we need is a field or a column in our data whose sum gives us these same values. And since count of burrito is simply counting rows in our data set, we can just create a new column and assign each row with a value of 1 so that we can then sum them up according to these row labels to give us the same answer. So I know that sounds a little bit more complicated than it really is, but let me show you what I mean. We'll go into our burrito ratings raw data. I'm going to insert a new column here. I'm going to call it number of reviews because our data is at the review level. And just type a 1, apply it down. So every row equals 1 in this case. Now back in our burrito pivot, I can change our data source. And since it's looking at only B through Q, I can just change that B to an A, or I can manually drag the selection and press OK. Now if I open up my field list again, you'll see this number of review fields is now available to me. So when I drag that in right next to count of burrito, the sum of the number of reviews is now exactly equal to the count of the burrito dimension. And again, because both of these fields are just counting rows, one's just doing it using a count summarization. The other one, which we just created, is doing it through a sum summarization. And this is the one that I can now use as part of my calculated field. So let's pull count of burrito out since we don't need that anymore. And keep an eye on this average total score. We're going to go into our calculated field. We're going to edit this definition. And basically what we're going to do is take this exact definition as we've calculated it here and divide that whole thing by the number of reviews, which will give us the right answer. So first things first, I'm going to surround all of this with another set of parentheses and then divide that by the number of reviews. And press OK. And see how that updates to give us the exact number that we're looking for. So now 2-in-1, 363, 363, California, should be 365, 365. And there you go. Now we have the correct version of average total score, which we achieved by using a counting column in our raw data to allow us to calculate that field properly. So let's go ahead and drag that average total score right up front after number of reviews. And now that we have kind of that average total score as our one main KPI or key metric here, I really want to draw attention to this column as my point of comparison across row labels. So one way to do that is to pull in a second instance of average total score. And instead of showing this with no calculation, let's show these values as a rank from large to small, where my base field is the burrito name. Now I can see the average total score in the form of a rank out of this entire list. So 2 and 1 is ranked 17th in this list in terms of the average total score. Arizona is ranked 4th with a score of 413. California only cheese is ranked 3rd, and so on and so forth. And now, as always, I have these fields available for sorting options, so I can sort descending by that average total score. And now my number 1 ranked burritos are listed at the top. Colimas burrito, veg out, both the scores of 5. And then on the other end of the spectrum, my lowest rated burritos like Campeon and Chicken Asada, which got scores of 2.5 and 2.38, are listed down here at the bottom of the list. So this rank column is definitely helpful. We can actually name it rank just to make it a bit more clear. But now let's really try to bring this data to life using some conditional formatting. So I want to move the rank field up in front of my total score, and I'm going to Control-Shift to select this total score column. And I don't want the grand total, so I'll go into Design, turn grand totals off, and just Shift-click. So now I've selected the entire column for average total score. I want to go into my Home menu, Conditional Formatting, and add a color scale here from green to red, because I want my high scores formatted green and my low scores formatted red. And as you scroll down, you can see kind of these shades of orange and red as the scores get worse, and then it goes up to yellows and greens as the scores get better. And now to take this visualization one step further, I'm going to select one of my component score columns and apply a highlight cell rule. And in this case, all I'm trying to do is kind of add a little bit more insight into which component scores are driving the average total score for a given burrito. So instead of doing color scales for all of these columns as well, which might get a little bit busy, I'm just going to do some highlight cell rules. So in cases where the score is greater than 4, let's highlight these green since that's a really strong score. And then with the same selection in place, let's do a less than highlight rule for any scores that are less than 3, which is a pretty bad score, with red fill and dark red text. Everything else will just stay unformatted. So now for that column, it's a lot easier to see kind of unusually high or unusually low scores. And now a little pro tip here, instead of going through that same process 3 more times, I can take this whole column and use a little tip in the Home menu called Format Painter. If I double click that tool, now I've copied this exact format, even though it's kind of a dynamic conditional format, and I can just click the first cell in each of these columns and apply the same conditional formatting logic to each of these. And then once I'm done, just press that button again, and there you have it. So now I've got a really nice visual showing me the overall ranked score as well as individual component scores, highlighting unusually high or low values. So some interesting trends here. Our top scores tend to do well across the board. We have some cases where a burrito like Deborah's Special did really well in terms of temperature, but not so well in terms of filling, and vice versa. So there's tons of different stories that you can now start to extract just simply by looking at the visualizations here. Now, final adjustment that I want to make here that you may have noticed is that a lot of these burritos only have a single review, which isn't necessarily fair when we're comparing it against other burritos that might have 3 or 6 or 13 or even 60 reviews. So what I'd recommend doing to make this a little bit more of an apples to apples view would be to go ahead and apply a value filter to the burritos column and choose greater than, so that we can say, let's only look at data or burritos where the number of reviews is greater than 1. We press OK. Now we trim down our view to a more apples to apples comparison among all burritos that have at least 2 ratings. And then of course you can kind of apply any other formatting tools you want. You could center these to make it a little bit more readable. You could change the column headers, whatever you choose. But what's great about pivot tables is that now that I've put in all that work to create this really cool view and template, I can then just swap out row labels to aggregate or cut up our data in different ways without having to recreate any of these formatting rules. So for instance, this is what you'll do in your homework. I can pull burrito out, and instead of rating by burrito, I can rate by location. And the only thing that needs to change here is the rank column, since that uses a parent of burrito. Now my base field is location, and there you have it. So I can go through the same process. I can sort my locations descending by the average total score, and there you have it. So just like we had analyzed burritos in the beginning, now we very quickly applied the same type of analysis to locations. So really, really powerful tools here for extracting tons of insight out of this data. And that wraps up our case study kickoff. Now it's your turn to get your hands dirty.